naming characters is very important. And I put a lot of time and effort into finding just the right names for my characters.
Yes.
And I've got some questions about your characters' names, and we're getting into kind of plot territory here.
That's
fine. So if it's going to be too spoilers, hold things back. I've told you before, I'm not a fan of spoilers, but okay. Five's name, it's Hector Nieves, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I looked up these names, and Nieves, as a patronymic, the most common roots is you'd have a man with pure white hair, because Nieves is a variation of snow, basically Snow White. And so generally it's a very old man in South America or Spain, and then he'd get this name, and way back when people didn't commonly have last names, and then give it to his kids. And that's apparently where most of the Nieveses came from. How much research did you put in that? Was it just you knew a Nieves, or it's to honor somebody, or did you actually dig through the history of it?
In his case, it was to honor somebody. A lot of times we pick the last names to honor somebody. In the case of Zara, I literally went to Zara Fazal, who plays Zara, and said, "Who's important in your life? Who would you like to be the namesake for Zara?" And she spoke of her father and the name Rashid, and so whenever that's usually the first thing I'll do, if we don't already have something planned, if only for inspiration. Hector Nieves is based on Andre Nieves, an amazing artist. If you've ever seen any footage of Nickelodeon Studios, the murals on the wall, the painted horses, the gorgeous things that line those hallways are the work of Andre Nieves, an amazing freelance artist who is also a good friend of Eric Robles. Eric actually, initiated a lot of the decor being, messed with at Nickelodeon at a time when it used to be a little more antiseptic. So that was in tribute to him. I do, though, take very seriously, the etymology of names or the history of names. And I do look up sometimes when I'm looking for first names too, like what they mean in other languages. We did that with Zara, I believe, when we were coming up with her name, and we were talking with the Muslim Public Affairs Council about names and what might be nice. So that is important to me, but in Hector's case, we did just really go to a friend. And Me-K.O's last name is also based on an amazing martial artist named Tak Kubota, who is a trainer and an actor and a 80-something-year-old black belt, who is Eric Robles's like a father to him. He's his sensei, his karate trainer. Eric's taken his karate his whole life, and he actually plays the master in Karate Trainer. And so anyway, Kobuta is his family name. So a lot of times, it's a chance just to honor either people in the gaming industry or people in our lives.
Okay. Now, my other main question, I've mentioned I study the English translations of the classics, Odysseus, Ulysses, Nyx. I just found that very odd. You have all of these really developed names, then you have one character, he's kind of a secondary character, and his name means nothing, literally. And my brain immediately went to the classics for some reason, and the story of Ulysses in the cave with the Cyclops. And when Ulysses says, "My name is no man," or no one. And so I didn't know if there was any connection there, but why you have all these great, long, expressive names. Why Nyx? Why did you name that character Nothing?
Here's the thing I love about the deconstruction. I remember listening to you and you're talking about, you were comparing us to, like, I think Gilgamesh or something. And I was thinking, my first thought was like, that's a bit of a reach. And then I thought, no, she's right. Like, I don't know if it was conscious, but a lot of these things, they do stem, they do go that far back. And I love your analysis because it's worthy. I mean, I am a a literature nerd, and these things do matter to me as they do to you, and sometimes they are very conscious. And then other times I hate to pop the balloon when it is just, sometimes a rose is just a rose, you know. The script coordinator for the majority of the Glitch Text episodes is Gregory Nix,
Ah,
who looks like, sounds like, because he also does the voice of Nix. And
okay.
so we just straight up put him in the show. And to be honest, I think it was a temporary name and we never replaced it. Bergie was also originally called Sussman after Josh Sussman, who plays him in the show, because I had worked with Josh before and I wanted him on the show. He's an amazing person and I knew he'd be an amazing glitch tech. So as a placeholder, we had Sussman on the show, and eventually we thought, well, we should change that name, so it's not so literal, because it looks like him and it sounds like him. So we changed it to Bergie after a common friend of mine and Josh's, named Christopher Burgosh, who is an amazing writer and who actually helped us create Greg the Bunny all those years ago. So a lot of it is uh, us homaging people in our lives. But as you say, like, I will look up a name usually, because I also want to know if, it's nice to just pick a name, but you don't want it to have any negative connotations. And you do, when you discover something wonderful as you did, in looking up a name, it also inspires you to make choices about the character you might not have otherwise. So, it's totally worthy.
Okay, so that leads really well into another question. Now, this is kind of special to me because it was the first time this show flew up a red flag. I think you heard the story of how I started watching your show. I was literally looking for bright colors to turn off my brain while I medicated my back in a hot tub. And yeah, that backfired. But
Nope, that didn't work
the
out.
the first kind of, let's call it a red flag that showed up for your show was the character of Inspector Barbara. Because when she
Yes.
came on screen, I broke out in a cold sweat. I panicked and I ran to my computer to make sure I had submitted my payment paperwork correctly for the National Park Service. Because I know Barbara. I'm like I. It's first off, her uniform immediately presented itself to me as a Class A National Park uniform.
Yes,
And
totally.
just the way she talks, the way she stands, her physicality, those glasses, that is a high level GS 12 level payroll administrator in the National Park Service. And I'm pretty sure I've worked directly with one named Barbara who looks just like that. Can you tell me, why did you choose to use that particular uniform for her, and where did the inspiration for her come from? Because that was the first thing that really made me sit up and go, what? With this
It
show.
There were a few dominoes that fell. It was also an archetypal role that Eric had loosely scribbled about in his notes. Like, here's who might be the company man, right? Emphasis on man. Dark, shadowy figures or bureaucratic bookworm characters who were all these like tall males, and right away we were very big on trying to flip these roles whenever possible. So we knew, for one thing, Phil is not going to answer to a man; it's going to be a woman. Also, can we not do, either Bob Lundegaard from Office Space or some imposing stiff? Like, can we find a new character? Can we not do the same old character? He can have a boss, and she can have whatever qualities we want her to have, but if she's a real person, she can come in any package. So in casting, Betsy Sidaro came up, who's an amazing comedian and actor. She's developing her short into a feature right now with my friend Rachel Bloom on a project called Mother Mary, and she has an amazing voice. So we brought her in and just said, take these lines and try to just breathe some life into them. Just have some fun. And so she added, like, you just got inspected by Inspector Number 7. Peace, and how she has fun at her job. And she likes the fact that, the little backstory we gave her is that she used to kind of be under Phil, and now she's and Inspector, and they have a bit of a history, but she's like rubbing it in a little bit, and not to be petty, but because, you know, she's just enjoying her position, and she does have her own motives and assignments that are beyond the pay grade of the viewing audience, but is not a mustache twisting or evil character, you know, necessarily. But she is following another agenda, and that's part of the mystery of the show. So that's really just how we developed her, by wanting to be different and not do the same things, and then being inspired by an actor. And did I miss part of your question? I feel like
The uniform.
Oh yes, the uniform.
What she's wearing. I mean, that
And the
I looked at
uniform,
that and my brain said, "Why is there a national park employee working for the corporate?"
that comes from the design team then, and we do talk at great length about the designs a lot of the time, but because I also take point in the writing and Eric takes point in the design, I'm not always in all the early design meetings, particularly on the first few episodes, as far as where I approve them, but I don't know where the initial inspiration came from. I have a feeling that upon hearing Betsy's voice, there were probably some research done, usually like a spectrum of who might be military leaders, scout den leaders, administrators. You know, these things are a Google search away. So when you look for, like, you know, administration types, up come, you know, uniforms, definitions, photos, and then people just tend to gravitate toward a few, and we're given choices. We probably looked at like 6 or 7 Barbaras, and then our eye went to the one that we ended up using. But we never discussed the specifics. At least Eric and I did not discuss the specifics, but that's why I would love to see our designers and our other artists also get a chance sometimes to be interviewed, because their process is, you know, largely unexplored, even sometimes on their own productions.
So, kind of talking about another high-ranking Hinobi employee here, the tech specialist in I'm Mitch Williams. That one really stuck out to me for one reason. Your show is constantly breaking the fourth wall, but so far it's always been in text, for lack of a better term. With those words and images, pow, bop, biff, she didn't. But in this case, you actually had an in-universe character turn and break the fourth wall very blatantly, and that hadn't happened before in the show. And it was smooth enough in the show that I didn't recognize it at first for what it was. It wasn't until after I was analyzing the whole season that I realized no in-universe character has ever broken the fourth wall before. So why?
Well, we did do it once. It almost doesn't count because it's so irreverent, but in Find the Glitch, 5 refers to weekly television when he says, you know, a glitch has never broken out in headquarters, and he's like, I mean this week, to the camera. But that one doesn't count. In the context of a show, we have never really done it before like that. Although someone once pointed out that Me-K.O looks at the camera in Castlestein, which is kind of funny, and she does, and it never registered with me before. We were it was just a gag that stayed. That episode got so tight, we didn't have time to go into a whole subplot about the tech specialist, whose name is not mentioned, but we were calling him Agent Boyd after Jenna Boyd, who introduced Eric and I, and who's who takes no prisoners herself as an executive. We were so desperate to use that voice actor to maintain humor and threat, and it was almost in our desperation like almost like a little bit of self-referential sarcasm. We needed you to know that Boyd was a threat. So Phil literally says, "Don't mess with this guy," and then as a gag, I believe Greg Nix wrote that script, actually, that Nix wrote it and put the line in, I think, "You don't want to mess with me." So he's just like saying, yeah, hey, everybody got that? I'm the threat. I'm the ticking clock in this third act, just so y'all know. I know I don't get a lot of screen time, but trust me, you don't want to mess with me. So sometimes those things just permeate, and we try them. a lot of times they get cut or called back because it's not quite the tone of our show. But in that situation, it stuck, if only because we really wanted you to know that Boyd coming was a big deal, and we had about 5 seconds to tell you.
Okay, fair.
uh,
So,
yeah.
also on this episode, you may have noticed this is one of my favorite episodes in the series. And I posted my review of it. And in the comments sections, I discovered that I had been making an assumption about the episode that apparently nobody else had been making. And there was enough of an assumption that they kind of called me on it. And this one I'm kind of hesitant to ask you because it might be getting into plot details that I don't want to know just yet. But what is the Williams family birth order? Because I saw that dynamic and I immediately paid to Mitch as the eldest sibling. But everybody else decided he was the youngest. And I was just kind of partially fascinated by you had no solid data, but two very different sets of opposite assumptions. So what can you say about that?
Well, I do have a straightforward answer, if you
Go
want
for it.
it. Okay, he is the younger.
Ah,
That doesn't invalidate in my mind the fact that he caretakes them, because he's chronologically younger. Emotionally, his emotional maturity, I think, seems quite older. And I know a lot of my friends are young people who grew up needing to parent their parents, to parent their siblings, and not always for like tragic reasons. That's just some people. Uh, Again, this show does not judge people who play games. In fact, we celebrate it, but we also don't ignore that when it's all you do, if you're always in the headset, other things are going to drop away, and we're not even judging that. We're leaving it to the audience to judge. It's, of course, it's very broad that, of course, the Furious Four have looked around their house, but we kind of created this moment that until they took the visors off, they almost didn't even know the state they were living in. And that was more, just to create that feeling that, if you're always plugged in, even Mitch knows you can't be as plugged in as they are all the time. And that's saying something, because he's the most plugged in tech you'll ever meet. And it's ironic, that he can judge that in them, but maybe not as much in himself. So anyway, for what it's worth, he is supposed to be the younger sibling. They're all pretty close in age, though. I mean, he's 18, so I don't think they're much older. But when the story began, it was just going to be about, when we began developing it, it was going to be about Mitch and one older sibling. And I really wanted it to be a sister. Other people saw it as a brotherly relationship. And I remember my solution to that was like, well, let's have brothers and sister. let's give him more siblings. And everyone thought, oh, great, let's design more characters. The show has an intensely...
is that why the brothers are twins? Save a little on character design there.
Yes, same thing in the real glitch techs, because we were really killing our team with how many characters we were developing and how often. We had so many ensembles. It's a lot for everyone to track, which is why you typically will only see characters in sometimes 2s or 3s. Like, it's rare we do entire groups. But in the real glitch techs, we made one new model, which was broken into 2 to create twins. Nameless is really just a regular tech body with a head put on top, similar to the character Snake Eyes in G.I. Joe, who was created the same way for economy. And then Simi was an existing character that we had underutilized. And I thought, oh, this is so great. We can use Simi, we can bring her back, but we can also use the character to show that there are more than one team. And yes, you can transfer, and what a natural way to bring up that concept by taking a character we've seen before. And everyone was saying, well, how are you going to get that across? Like, that's so complicated. And the character just says it, like, oh, you're on the she transferred to the Debney team, you know, like one line is all we needed. And if it's tossed off casually and she just goes, hey guys, then it, you know, it works.
Okay, so we're kind of going over our hour, but I'm really enjoying this. Do you have any time constraints? Because I don't want to.
I would love you to feel you got everything answered that you needed, so I can go another like 20 minutes, half hour.
Okay, so hold on. I just had a question about. Okay, so I'm Mitch Williams. That episode. Why 1984? You don't
Oh,
mention, you do not, that stuck out in my brain for various reasons. I am a literature nerd. There's a big glaring obvious reason. Then 1984 was kind of the golden age for animation in the United States, in my opinion. And
yes.
I have other reasons to be fairly attached to that year, but you don't mention addresses in it, I don't think in any other case.
No, we don't. Well, that's the year Ghostbusters came out.
Okay.
And Spengler is Harold Ramis's character in Ghostbusters. So 1984 Spengler Street is one of the many Ghostbusters references in the show. Out of the 20 episodes we did, if you count the pilot as 2 episodes, there's a good like 22 Ghostbusters references in the show, because I mean, as a child, I literally strapped a vacuum cleaner to my back and, you know, pretended to be a Ghostbuster, and I still dress up as one at Halloween. And it's just one of the most imaginatively transportive shows of my youth. And to be doing a show that's similar, I just sloppily pay homage to it everywhere. And there's so many lines in the show, and almost every time we mention a street address, it's a character from Ghostbusters. Tully and Melnitz, the street, let's see, Jerry's store is on Zeddemore, which is Ernie Hudson's character from Ghostbusters. Stance Avenue is Dan Aykroyd's character. And then when Mitch Williams is walking with like a big hulking tech in the Buds episode, he calls him Venkman, which was Bill Murray's character. So they're all in there.
Okay. So, on a more kind of a more serious note, now you've mentioned to me before that you just let some things go in the show, some unrealistic things, because this is set in Toontown.
Yeah.
And the big kind of glaring thing for me is the grotesque human rights violations Hinobi is committing through their glitch tech. So, how much serious thought have you given to that, and is it going to be addressed in the show?
It is going to be addressed in the show head on, and we've already written an episode that brings the topic up for the first time. It's one of our unproduced episodes. It's something that, you know, when you look to create verisimilitude in the show, you do have to acknowledge it. When you say, you know, we want people to react as real people would, eventually you have to ask that question. We don't yet fully understand how the technology works that affects the minds, but I can give you the scoop that like that technology is one of the first discoveries I think made by this company, and it just so happens that it was not the thing that they led their technology on. For some interesting reasons, this company became more interested in creating consumer tech than anything else. But we talked a lot about T-Ray technology and its abilities. I'm not going to actually try to define that. I'll just let people Google it. There's also there has been data stored in the DNA of human beings, like written to and loaded from. You know, with DNA as sort of like a organic hard drive.
Yeah, I was taking a biology course when the first woman managed to really do that for the first time. So.
And we would look all these things up, no matter how ridiculous, you know, conceiving of things like plixels. We would really do as much research as we could, because I do appreciate science fiction as being based in science, you know, for many reasons now more than ever. Science is important, and you know, it hurts me as a fan, I can step back and appreciate any show. But when I see Star Trek paying lip service to science but not really using it as a foundation, it bumps me, because that's one of the things that made that show great. And I don't mind that Star Wars is more fantasy. That's what it's established that Star Wars is. That's wonderful about Star Wars. But, you know, we made a decision early on when it seemed that we could at least base things on things that might be possible one day, with the exception of portals, which is really the biggest impossibility.
I actually had to research that for my science fiction book, Dying Embers, and I did find one scientist in Texas who is working on a portal technology.
That's amazing.
And
At what scale? Because that's the thing I heard is like, well, you could theoretically be done, but for something to be big
tiny.
enough, yeah.
He's basically spiraling a laser through a particular kind of crystal.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, I of course took it and ran with it and made it big enough to take spaceships, but I'm pretty sure it's on the micro level.
I don't want to get too far from your question, but I always would look to the original Star Trek for inspiration. And they made so many wild leaps on that show, but aerospace was always the crux of everything. So we said, all right, we want then, you know, computer programming and real world science to be our foundation. And even if we go off the rails, at least we started on that track and everything can trace back to it. And also similar to Star Trek, I remember Gene Roddenberry saying, well, you know, the teleporting, the beaming was to save money. We couldn't afford a shuttlecraft to land on every planet, and the time it would have taken also wasn't worth it story-wise. So even though it was the most ridiculous thing, we needed to beam. And that's how I saw portals. And I said to everybody, like, we're not going to use portaling a lot. It can't get us out of every situation, and I don't want to overuse it because it's one of those powers that just can break the whole show. So we've created rules for it, etc. But we were talking about Hanobi, and did I get off track with the question?
Yes. Well, you answered the question before you went off track. It was, okay, will you be addressing the grotesque human rights violations of Hanobi?
Yeah. We will. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say was, you know, I know Eric thought we might do it even a little sooner, but look, the show is so fun, and it's like these kids, what they're doing, it's always going to be a gray area, but we and the audience are all along for this ride, and we're having a good time, and we're enjoying the show, and we're not ready to break that quite just yet, but it is a factor, and people do need to ask these questions, and it does start to happen. And because, you know, that's just an analogy for growing up too. You know, we don't always think about the consequences of our actions, and, you know, from our own perspective, we're doing everything right, but you know, our decisions impact others, and eventually as we get older, we start to become more aware of that. So, you know, whether it's just basic empathy and responsibility, so it will come into play in some form. And as I say, we already have one episode that starts to drop the first major seed.
Okay, so to wrap this up, my thing is over-analysis. So I've got a question. I'm probably thinking way too hard about this, but in the Settling the Score episode, you have one of your kaiju take the top out of a mountain. Now, I work for the National Park Service, and I happen to live every day with the consequences of what happens when a disaster takes the top out of a mountain at Crater Lake National Park, because that's right what happened there. And that changes the weather patterns, that changes the local ecosystem. And even if Hanobi does manage to replace an entire mountaintop with plixels, and they better have a lot of energy if they want to do that, I can't imagine that a plixel-based creation is going to entirely replace especially the meteorological effects of the mountain. And in another episode, you established that uncontrolled pixel energy attracts a glitch. So did you just create a glitch haunted mountain there?
I love that. I heard that comment, and it's like, yeah, we probably did. What's great is if you're in our writer's room, if we use this premise, by the way, I'm going to come looking to commission you. We 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 ask these questions. We make decisions, and then they create situations we then have to deal with, and we try to be ahead of them for the most part. And sometimes they catch us by surprise. You know, in that one, to be honest, I think when it was initially done, it was a cool shot. And this would happen a lot. I would go in and police things and say, oh, that's awesome, but we can't do that because dot, dot, dot. And I got less obsessive about that because of the, you know, the cool quotient being important, and also just having some fun. And I always, in a case like that, you know, it was extreme, but worth doing, and we can deal with it. I've always wanted to do an episode, and I'm sure we will, that looks into the patching. See, that's a great way the show reveals itself through its stories, because, you know, the question, what happens to all these like spackle jobs we do all over town? Is that sustainable? How does that work? Are there glitch techs who just go out and do maintenance? Like road workers, like, oh, we got to go check the patch. It's so and so. It's starting to decompose. You know, that because the energy signature is starting to drop. So how sustainable is it to plug all these holes? And that is something that I would wait to just do in an episode, so that as the story unfolds, the audience is going, oh, so they have to do that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a great way to slowly reveal the lore. So that's something we've thought about since day one, but we never had a story that went with that particular kind of case. If it's not an entire story, we might just show it in the periphery. Like, we might start the show with the characters patching or checking on patches, and then they're pulled into some other adventure. But it's a great way to create this mythology. As far as the mountain goes, maybe they patched the mountain, maybe they didn't. Maybe they just put up a giant glitch map to cover the mountain from various points of view. It depends if that's an inhabited mountain. Are there natural creatures passing through those barriers or not? Are they physical barriers? You know, like, there's so many ways we could deal with it. And if we can get an interesting story out of it, we will. If nothing else, you've made me realize that if we ever do an episode where we show all the patches, you know, coming apart in town, we have to show that mountain. And yes, you know, depending on the signature, maybe it does attract glitches, and that's a great premise for a story. You know, something we've done is created a bigger problem. We have to go deal with it. And that is the joy of working on a show like this. The only thing is, to those watching too and who are creating their own stories, a cool concept is a very precious thing, but it is hollow if there isn't character associated with it to create like emotion and importance. And I learned that working at Nick and other studios. It was very humbling to realize most studios eat cool, high concept ideas for breakfast. The truth is, your amazing idea is amazing, but you look over and you'll see 10 amazing ideas all sitting in the same waiting room as you. What makes the difference is who you are and what you bring emotionally to that concept. That's what a good studio is actually going to invest in. So we can't tell the Haunted Mountain story until we have a character concept that it will fit nicely for, you know, some metaphorical thing where an unchecked problem that has, you know, gone festering for too long might be an emotional issue with a character. And that's why when that mountain blows, our character should blow, you know, and that's how we learn to put these things together. Ping is like, the Cuban ping is like flubber. It reacts based on the energy put into it. If High Five was not in the state of mind he was in, they would have taken that cube home in 5 minutes. He could have been out of that store as quick as he wanted to be, but because he was emotionally compromised, he pushed the cube, and the cube reacted, and the whole episode exploded on him because of his emotions. And not until he resolved could the cube resolve. And the same is true. It's almost the exact same story in Going, Going, Gauntlet, where Me-K.O is chasing her anxiety and eventually she befriends it. And those stories are not always apparent right away, but if you chase those feelings and it will start coming together in a way that tells you you're onto something. So anyway, I only go into all that because so many people tell me of their amazing ideas, and they are amazing, but I want them to know it's only half the recipe.
Yeah, my first science fiction book, it came out of essentially a broken heart, but it was me working through some emotions that I'd never really parsed.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that till it was nearly done. I was just writing a
Right.
fun science fiction story.
Yes, and those are wonderful. Sometimes you don't know until
Yeah.
you step back. And Jenna Boyd frustrated us very early on because why couldn't we get this green light? We had an amazing show about kids chasing video game monsters. Like, what kid wasn't going to love this show? And yet she was still not giving us the green light because she wanted us to go back and work on the characters more and why they did it and what they wanted and how dare she. But that's what you need, someone to take you to task for those things. And because we got there, then I was able and Eric was able to um, ask that of everyone who worked under us. Once we got there, we had to pull everybody up, as well. So we're thankful to that kind of gatekeeping, and I want to prepare young people and old people alike who go into a studio situation, be prepared for that. And if somebody doesn't ask you, you should still ask yourself. We gave ourselves far more notes than Nickelodeon gave us. At the end of the day, we would get about, a half hour's worth of notes, and then we proceed to have a 2-hour meeting where we would change 100 other things because we had set our own bar, and that's what hopefully everyone will be trying to do with their own work.
Okay, well, I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you for your time. You've answered all of my questions I had.
Good.
And we could keep talking for another hour easy, but my quality of talk starts to diminish after that. So
Same.
yeah. Okay.
I just want to say I appreciate you so much, Betty. I really do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to say I really appreciate your show. There's one aspect of your show I just want to say thank you for, the visuals. I am on the spectrum and I'm extremely sensitive to grotesque visual imagery. And a lot of the animation of the late 90s, the early aughts, it seemed to be playing into this gross out imagery. And it prevented me from enjoying it. But Glitch Text doesn't have that. It's a very beautiful style of animation. And it's very, this is going to sound kind of funny given the content and how deconstructed the background imagery is, but it's very natural. It's a very naturalistic beauty. This is kind of what I'd see if I unplugged and went outside in the forest. And I've just enjoyed that tremendously watching this show.
Thank you. I don't think anyone has ever said that before or framed it that way, and it's so great to hear. Yeah, Nickelodeon and a lot of kids stuff does have a lot of gross out, and Nickelodeon was the slime network, and it was very difficult for us to do, in Buds in particular, the tentacly stuff and the goopy stuff is not normally what the kind of thing we would do. It was something that was kind of happening in the storyboards. We had one particular storyboard artist who just was really enjoying themselves with that, and we pulled it back a little bit, but we also thought, well, maybe we'll let that be this genre a little bit. Garbile was our first episode outside of the pilot, and so, I mean, I think it had a little bit of that because we were also trying to let Nickelodeon know, don't worry, we're a goofy comedy too. We're not just an intense series. See, look, somebody slipped in slime and fell down. But we couldn't commit to that fully, and we feel the same, and every choice you get to make is a definitive choice, and everyone just wanted to kind of emulate things that they love. And to be honest, I really think that the majority of the artists, writers, and actors I work with are somewhere on the spectrum. And I'm really glad that, that's something that's being normalized for people, just like our mental health and these, the spectrum is so broad, but an awareness of it and an awareness of personality types is so important and helps kids get to know themselves and others. And, it's a major part of the show. So I'm really glad we did not want a show that would be obnoxious in any way, although I do realize it is like wall-to-wall sound. But we made it so that if you turn the sound off, you should hopefully be able to watch the entire show as a silent film and still understand the majority of the stories and emotions. We tried to work hard at that.
That is very interesting that you say that. My main problem is a sound sensory issue, so I just have all of my equipment, no bass.
Yes.
And
yes.
that can mess with your enjoyment of something if it's very dependent on the bass. But interesting. That's very interesting.
I'd be curious to know what you would think, because it's actually a preschool tactic used to convey simple stories to young children. And we challenged our artists and would always say, look, despite all of our sci-fi mumbo jumbo and wall-to-wall dialogue gags, it really needs to work as a short film so that younger people, older people, international audiences can all appreciate it. It was like this self-imposed challenge. And that's why certain things are created. Like in the pilot, we have a snap bracelet that shows you that 5 has a special privilege that Mitch takes away. And, you literally see Poppy kind of give it to him. 5 drops it, Poppy gives it to him, Mitch takes it away, Me-K.O finds it and returns it. So it's like a totem to say, if all we understand about this show is the visuals, this kid has something he's proud of. It seems to grant him access because they scan his bracelet. Somebody in that contest steals it from him. He's lost everything. You don't have to know the dialogue to know, one person took from the other person, and in the end, he's going to get it back. And, so, and it's real fun because we wouldn't have had that totem, I think, otherwise. And the bracelet is so important. It also links 5 and Me-K.O. The minute you see Me-K.O, bling, there's a little gleam of light on her bracelet, and it just lets you know, hey, they're the same, these two,
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Same.
And okay, so you have a great day, and stay clear of the smoke.
Yeah, doing my best, Betty. You too.
Okay.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.